To go back for a second, because you mentioned a couple of things about internet pornography, and it seemed like you had something, really beneficial that maybe we could share with some of the. I don't know if it's specifically towards men or towards women as well, and like the way it is harmful, and if there is a way for it to be beneficial, because you said some psychologists are recommending it, and why. If we can touch on that for a moment.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is not in the book. So if people are listening to this and hoping to find out, this isn't. This might be a book at some point, but it wasn't in here. But one of the probably the central things to know about pornography is, well, there's a few things, but it's not a sexual issue. So sometimes when people talk about they're a sex addict or addicted to pornography, what they're actually addicted to is the sensation that they get from being in that world. There's an escapist kind of quality to surfing that's very heavily rooted in evolution. That the male brain is geared towards novelty within sexual arenas. There's an effect that you can look up called the Coolidge effect. This has been widely studied in psychology, and it's actually a fairly old finding, but the Coolidge effect basically shows that males have this refractory period after they've had intercourse, that they can't physically perform with that same partner immediately again. That's true for like 99% of males, that there's this refractory or this recovery period. But, and this is what the Coolidge effect says, if that male is introduced to a brand new novel partner, then that refractory period goes down to almost zero. So that shows us that the male brain is actually geared towards this type of novelty in partner and not just to sex. Because if it's a sex addiction, then you'd presumably want to have sex with this, whoever it is, over and over again, right? And so what the internet does, what the internet pornography does exceptionally well is provide unlimited variety and novelty to the user, so that the user can then keep their levels, their neurochemical levels, and dopamine is one of the main neurochemicals involved, hold that dopamine level at an incredibly high level over extended, unnatural periods of time. And because of the variety and novelty, if the dopamine levels start to drop for that male, then they can immediately bump those levels back up again by changing the subject searches and go into something novel. So, initially it might just be sexuality or intercourse or partners looking, and then it's groups, and then it's all sorts of weird things you can get to because the internet allows that to happen. Right. So what males don't understand, number one, you learn nothing about relationships when you're doing that. You learn nothing about being a good sexual partner when you're doing that. In fact, you learn the opposite. Your brain learns that sex looks like this. Sex looks like this impersonal, pleasure-driven experience with unrealistic expectations about performance and so on like that. That by the time they actually try to have normal sexual relationships, their brain doesn't kick into gear on it. There's been this epidemic, especially within North America, around young people, 16 to 20-year-olds, going to the family doctor and saying, I can't get hard with my partner. And family doctors prescribing Viagra for young adults as a result of that. If you look that up, it's been reported across media in North America for years. There was actually a CTV, that's what the local news channels, there was a report in Halifax like 5 or 6 years ago about this phenomenon of 18-year-olds getting Viagra. Well, the reason is because by the age of 10, over 50% of young boys surf hardcore porn daily. So by the time these young boys are trying to have a normal relationship, maybe around 16, 17, they can't, because their brain understands sex to be something different. And it understands sex to be this coping experience, because what the boys and men teach their minds to view sex as is not as a sexual experience, but as a release experience, as an escape from the world experience.
Interesting. I just wrote down sex as coping. I've never heard that when talking about in pornography. That's really fascinating. So you're saying that because maybe at that age you maybe have a bit of ennui, your body's changing, you have all these things, high school, everything's new, and so to cope from that, you're looking at pornography as an escapism. And so how does that affect when those young boys are going out into the world when they have to meet women? Like, if they're not in a negative mood, they don't want to get aroused, or how?
Well, so let me add another piece there, and let me tie it back to the book. Like, it was this line of thought around sexual offending, internet pornography, and so on that led me to the hack and evolution and general mental health work. Because as we've established here, our ancestors evolved in a time where everything was a survival threat. And so for our ancestors, being in a vigilant mindset 24 hours a day was crucial to survival. Like, they could not let their guard down. There was danger around every corner. There was the risk of starving to death. So constantly being on guard, looking for food sources. Like, there was this constant state of anxiety for our ancestors. Okay? You cannot have sex when you're in that mindset. Like, can you imagine having your life literally at risk and then thinking, hey baby, what are you doing? You can't. Those are two different mindsets. So, because as I said, evolution required both survival and procreation, then evolution had to develop a system so that the male could switch and then actually have sex when they're in this mindset. So what it did was, it developed this flooding of the brain with this dopamine. That's the neurochemical I mentioned before, which is a pleasure chemical. So the scenario I often say is, imagine our male ancestor walking through the woods when people were few and far between, right? So our ancestors walking through the woods in this total state of vigilance around survival, anxious and everything. And they come across an eligible female. So when that male visually sees an eligible female, the process of arousal starts, because arousal was an evolved mechanism. And the arousal is to flood that guy's brain with dopamine. When the brain gets flooded with dopamine, all negative, worry, everything disappears. Common sense disappears. And males continue to experience that to this day. When a male's aroused, he thinks differently. He makes poor choices. And then when he's done, this is the other thing from evolution. When the male, so he escapes from anxiety, he has intercourse, and then at the moment of orgasm, that male brain, the dopamine washes out, and you go right back to vigilance mode, which makes total sense from our evolutionary perspective. And our males today continue to experience that at the moment of orgasm, thinking changes. Like, things that might have been arousing in the moment are now like, I don't know what I was doing about that. Like, questioning ourselves, like, you know. Right. So that mechanism of having this dopamine and arousal paired and washing away all anxiety, that's the part that becomes addictive for men. And you can sustain that level of dopamine at such a high level for such a period of time that you don't realize that it's not sex that I'm after here. It's this dopamine hit. And that's why guys that have problems with internet porn oftentimes surf, for an hour at a time. If the internet porn was just used because your partner's not available and you're horny, that's a 5-minute session. If you're using it for something totally unrelated to sex, which is, my life sucks, I hate myself, I've got no friends, I want to escape into a world where nothing matters. That's the hour, sometimes 2-hour session. And they don't want those internet porn sessions to end, because when they end, they crash. And then now, not only do they think, my life sucks, I have no friends, I have no girlfriend, I also just fucking surf porn for 2 hours. What a loser I am. Jesus Christ. I'm never going to do that again.
So it's essentially self-medicating.
It's entirely self-medicating. And so when health professionals talk about these issues as sexual, it really irks me, because it's not sexual. We are misusing an evolutionary adaptation, which is to have that ability to procreate in times where we should not be in that mindset. That's what's happening. But unfortunately, it really distorts our thinking around what sex is for the males.
Right. That's fascinating. So I guess from everything you've said, the only way to frame it as using internet pornography as a net benefit would be if you're using it with your partner, if there's something productive, or like, it's really interesting. Do you have other ways that you think it might be a net benefit?
So the terminology I use to talk about that issue is If porn is a means to an end, then maybe there's some room in there for it to be something helpful. But if it's an end in and of itself, in other words, I'm not using for something, I'm using it for the sake of being in that world, then it's not. I mean, a clear indication of when it's problematic is when the male goes to internet porn when they're not aroused or horny or anything. It's almost like a rote, reflexive kind of movement towards that.
Bored.
They're bored. I mean, it's very similar to some of the work done in addiction circles that people drink because they're angry, lonely, tired, bored, frustrated. And in a similar way too, like alcohol often is problematic, but there's ways to use it that it's not. But in the same way as alcohol and porn can be used for essentially non-problematic reasons, but it's a slippery slope because your brain is slowly learning, you know what? When I'm in this world, I really do escape all my troubles. There's something, I talk about this in a